We're donning our loincloths, swinging our clubs, and questing for fire. That either means security's about to violently escort us out of Dick's Sporting Goods, or we're playing Joe and Mac on this episode of Doki Doki Game Club. Game Club. Hello and welcome to Doki Doki Game Club, a retro video game podcast. I am your host, Brandon Fincher, and I am joined today by a trio of talented troglodytes, Frank Martin.
Hello.
Brian Grogan.
Yo, yo, yo.
And Mr. Joseph Luster.
Bafoom, bafoom.
On Doki Doki Game Club, each of our co-hosts takes a turn choosing a particular title from video game history, and we announce the selection online so everyone can play along at home. From there, we have 2 weeks to spend with the game, at which point we reconvene for a deep dive into the nuts and bolts of the game. Today's selection was made by Joseph, and the title, as you may have gathered, is Joe and Mac for the Super Nintendo Entertainment System. So Joe and Mac, we're going to focus on the Super Nintendo version, but there are multiple ports for this game, and I just kind of wanted to preface by saying that we're going to mention them probably all at some point during the show. But for starters, Joe and Mac, also called Tatake Genshijin, literally means Joe and Mac Caveman Combat. It was released by Data East in 1991, most places by the title Caveman Ninja. The Genesis version, PC version, and Super Nintendo version were released the same year. And in 1992, we saw an Amiga release. In 1992, later that year, we also saw the NES release. And the following spring, the Game Boy version came out. So we've got all these different versions of Joe and Mac. But before we dive into the game itself, I wanted to talk a little bit about the historical significance of the art of caveman entertainment, of kind of dinosaur and caveman entertainment, as it pertains specifically to video games. But I mean, just kind of in general, there was a lot happening in that late 80s, early 90s sort of block of about 5 or 6 years where we had a slew of games. We had Bonk's Adventure. We had Caveman, the UGG Olympics, which followed or actually that would have been the first of the bunch.
That's such a good title.
Yeah, it's pretty funny. So Bonk's, there was a ton of Bonk's games, and they got further and further from the caveman aesthetic as it went on. Things like Air Zonk and offshoots and that sort of thing. But the original Bonk in 1989 was grounded in this aesthetic of bald-headed dude with a loincloth, eating raw meat and doing the whole thing. 1991, we also had Big Nose Caveman, which I don't think I've ever actually played before. And
never even heard of it.
Yeah, and the same year, Chuck Rock, which I am familiar with.
Oh yeah. That was kind of an oddly big game, despite it looks like shit now. Just the designs.
It probably looked like shit then. Especially when compared to the likes of Joe and Mac. But
yeah.
And not to mention, before the show we were talking about Captain Caveman and the sorts of things. I mean, Flintstones. You can trace back the sort of Western obsession with prehistoric comedy way back. But yeah, Brian, you had something in specific.
Yeah, actually, I actually kind of looked into that. So it's something that actually comes up in Joe and Mac is one of the weapons is the stone wheel. We'll get more into that at some point. But my first experience with that. Does anyone remember the comic BC?
Yes.
Where they're all riding around in that stone tire, and that was kind of their big trope. And I'm thinking, I started researching into that, and that comic book actually, or the comic strip, goes back to 1958, which I think is probably the first time. I did a bunch of research, and I couldn't find any sort of earlier reference to a stone wheel anywhere.
Interesting.
So you have Alley Oop, which was in 1932. That's when that debuted, and it seems like some of the earlier references to caveman riding dinosaurs. It seems like perhaps the earliest thing that I think this kind of caveman craze was going after. But it seems like, to me, if you look at the dates there, 1930, and then another 30 years later, we had BC started up, which that was 58. Flintstones started in 1960. And then another 30 years was Bonk's Adventure.
Yeah.
This
well,
game,
I mean, Flintstones ran hard for years and years.
It did.
I mean, that's surely the peak, the pinnacle of caveman, the caveman genre, I guess we'll call it.
What I'm thinking is I'm thinking we're perhaps due for another resurgence. Coming around the 2020 age, we might get another resurgence of that.
So yeah, I mean, we can kind of trace the popularity, the sort of we talk about Flintstones being where it blew up, and if you think back to our childhood, Flintstones is also where it more or less died. Think about that movie that came out with Rick Moranis and John Goodman.
Oh yeah,
I mean, like that was a stinker.
Well, it had a sequel too.
Yeah, but I mean, at that point, I think it had already just kind of fizzled out.
Yeah.
I mean, you look at the games. I mean, with 1991, with Chuck Rock. I mean, there were certainly sequels to some of the games we mentioned already, and sequels to Joe and Mac. But it starts to fizzle out. And there's kind of a crossover. I mean, there was a television show Dinosaurs, which we talked a little bit.
I was going to bring up Dinosaurs because that's also 1991.
And that's also awful. It was pretty bad then, and it has not aged well. But let's not forget Jurassic Park too. I mean, like that was probably the thing that spawned my obsession with dinosaurs as a kid. I mean, that and like zoo books and things like that. But yeah, I wanted to kind of set the table for this, the precedence of this Western obsession with cavemen and dinosaurs, to kind of explain where we were entertainment wise, and like how something like Joe and Mac came to be.
I wonder how it was in Japan, because Data East is a Japanese game, right?
Well, yeah, Data East is definitely. I mean, they're a Japanese company.
Sorry.
And
I'm wondering how the scene was in the 90s. It was a dinosaur mania over there as well.
Joseph, you might recall, and if you do, then you'll have to help us with a title. There was an anime that was like Dino Boy something. Does that sound familiar? Dino Boy Riki, or is it?
It might.
Am I mixing some things up now?
Well, there was definitely what was that name? There's an NES game, The Adventures of Dino Riki. Yeah, I don't know if that was like
maybe I'm confusing the art from the box with
a manga or something.
Yeah.
Hey dudes, your babes are missing. Back in the distant past, way back, like when rock and roll was just rock and fast food was dinner you couldn't catch, lived two cave dudes named Joe and Mac. Whether it was dinosaur demolition or pterodactyl hang gliding, life for the boys was pretty cool. Cool, that is, until a bogus bunch of Neanderthal nerds crashed their village and scared off all the cave babes. Now the cave babes are out there, somewhere, lost and really lonely. So, what are you waiting for? It's up to Joe and Mac to get them back.
Okay, guys, so let's dive in on Joe and Mac for the Super Nintendo. Who wants to give me an elevator pitch for what Joe and Mac is? Like, what is the game? What do you do? What's the synopsis? I mean, we just got the back of the box courtesy of Joe, but like, what is Joe and Mac? Like, what's the experience you're going to have if you play it?
I mean, it's a pretty straightforward game. I'll just go ahead and describe it really quick because I picked it, much to the now chagrin of the rest of everyone else on the podcast. It's a pretty straightforward side-scrolling action game. Kind of, I would hesitate to call it a platformer because it's based in the arcades and it's definitely not friendly for platforming. So it's just kind of, it's like rides that line between platformer and beat 'em up where you're just fighting a bunch of enemies, and it's very much like short levels, build up to a big boss fight, rinse and repeat for about 12 stages.
10, I believe, with some bonuses.
Yeah, so it's really straightforward, very cartoonish style, like very animated enemies, depending on what version you play, of course, but it's definitely like leans on the comedy, like the caveman kind of just big-eyed dinosaurs and weapons like bones, hammer, like old classic hammers.
Yeah, we'll get into the weapons, but I think if I were to distill down even further what you just said, I feel like Joe and Mac is sort of, call it a prehistoric run and gun.
Yeah.
I was going to say run and gun.
Yeah, you're moving from left to right, and you're attacking with projectiles.
It tries to be a run and gun, but fails miserably at it.
Yeah,
well,
it wants to,
but
for sure.
But nevertheless, I feel that the genre assessment is apt.
Yeah, I would classify it as action, an action game.
Yeah,
it's all it can be, I guess.
2D side-scrolling action game with mild platforming.
Mild platforming, very mild, very frustrating, and
yeah. Well, so we have a foundation with which to build our TP on top of here, and I wanted to kind of talk before we move into a stage-by-stage breakdown of the opening cutscene for the game, because in addition to certain mechanics, this is the moment of the game that varies the most between the multiple platforms. So since we're focused on the Super Nintendo, let's kind of start with that. The game opens with a nighttime scene in some sort of wilderness setting, and you have a couple of huts perched up onto a grassy knoll overlooking a valley or something, and you get this music and followed by these Neanderthal men moving into this what is implied to be a village or explained to be a village. And in the Super Nintendo, you get a wall of text that is essentially the back of the box, but with some silly added puns and wordplay. Like Tyrannosaurus Rex is spelt WRECKS, and when it talks about pterodactyl hang gliding, in parentheses, it has peak in the beak, which I thought was pretty funny in the cutscene. Yeah. But these Neanderthal men in this location move into this hut, one after the other. It's like a clown car the way they file into this thing. And we get a scream, like a collective scream from women. And then the game just, like, it goes on to explain that these guys scared the girls off.
The babes.
But you don't ever actually the babes. Yeah, exactly. Sorry. But you never see the babes flee in the Super Nintendo version. There's just this sinister like fade out, and I realize that it's way worse. Like I realized that what Nintendo was going for with that was like, well, we don't really want to show any implied stuff or anything like the arcade
pillaging or
anything.
Do.
Yeah. But let's do this. But man, it's just like a horror film where the thing that you don't see, like the stuff that happens off camera, your mind is capable
and
of.
These dudes are gnarly too. Like make sure these insanely bearded cavemen.
Yeah, and I don't know at what point I became aware of the idea of cavemen beating cave women or dragging them back to their caves or whatever, but it was something that seems like has been in my head since the get-go.
Oh, it's a huge trope.
It is a huge trope, and it's something very young in life. So, I mean, no kid that would have been playing this in '89 would have had a hard stretch to go, okay, well, these guys went in there and girls screamed, so that's scary. But I digress.
What I'm wondering, though, because if this is the story that these the bearded dudes grabbed the unbearded dudes as ladies, why are they all guarded by these wild animals, like wild dinosaurs? Like, are they in cahoots?
Who knows?
They're close to the nature.
Yeah, is the T-Rex in cahoots with the bearded guys for the babes? I don't know.
I think Joe and Mac are like the city cavemen. They've kind of moved past being all uncivilized, and then these guys resent them for it because they got all the ladies since they're all clean shaven.
I have another theory that I'm actually going to save until we get to boss talk, but I have a more elaborate assessment of what's going on in the game. Yeah.
If I could, like, at what point did these guys become ninjas? Because that never made any sense either.
That's why they're not there. They're training in the dojo.
Yep.
Oh.
Yeah.
But that's why they can do these sweet flips when you hold up and B.
Exactly. Or the tuck and roll.
The
that's
tuck and
not
roll,
caveman standard issue. No.
Well, actually, the bearded guys do it, though. They tumble around.
They're rolling
That's
all
true.
around.
That's true. I don't know. I don't have a good answer for that. Well, so in the Super Nintendo, we have this kind of PG or G-rated setup And the arcade game, which everything else is sort of a port and it all sort of derives from that. The arcade version, Genesis version, and PC version opens with no narration. We see the same Neanderthals come in, enter the hut, and they actually proceed to drag the cave babes out by their hair in proper caveman fashion. And there's even like a joke to sort of lighten up this, preface to caveman rape or whatever that's about to occur, where one of the Neanderthals is struggling at the end to drag the large, heavy-set cave gal out of the cave, which of course in the late '80s and early '90s was probably quite funny.
Well, I don't want to hammer on the meaning behind this too much, because I know we'll get carried away, but. Does this imply that these are all the cave babes of the village, or are they all Joe and Mac's girlfriends?
That's a good question. Yeah. Well, but then there's just no way to answer it, because where are Joe and Mac?
At the dojo.
They were somewhere. Yeah, well, they're at the dojo because we said so. But why they were gone somewhere? I don't know. It seems really strange.
Probably not surfing some lava waves or something.
Yep.
So, and I don't want to keep talking about the cutscenes too much here.
No,
but
we're going to,
Brandon.
This is
well,
this
I might as well
show.
see them through at this point, right? No, but the last thing I wanted to mention was in the Game Boy version, the Neanderthals show up. They go into the hut. The girls flee out with Neanderthals chasing after them, so not being dragged out by the hair. And then they switch it up with the last one. There's still a joke gag where the Neanderthal is the last Neanderthal out is fleeing for his life from the heavyset girl that was being dragged out in previous games.
Wah, wah.
So, wah, wah, exactly.
What a failed joke.
Okay, so we have a setup to the game. Joe and Mac obviously came back to their village and found the girls all scared off, and proceeded to, seek out the Neanderthals and get their girls back. So in order to do that, you have to play through the game and experience the action. So who wants to kind of give me a breakdown on some of the features of the gameplay itself?
Well, it's very reminiscent to Super Mario Brothers 3, which is, I guess, another trope of this podcast.
Theme, yeah.
Where you're on this kind of overworld with connecting dots and lines that you go through to choose a level. But unlike Mario Brothers 3, you don't have kind of branching paths or options. Basically, it's very linear, and you get these kind of little branches off that are bonus levels that you need to access to with a skeleton key that you get from a bonus section of whatever level you're in.
Right, and with the Super Nintendo version, they specialize it for that, but no other version that had been released has that same overworld feature. It was tacked on to the Super Nintendo version. And the arcade and Genesis versions, you have the branching paths at the end of certain stages.
And it doesn't really even make sense. Like that first branch, you have that branch, but the first branch goes to it's like a save checkpoint. It's not even a stage.
No, you got a little dude that shows up, and that's it.
But I would say that the whole reason for the map then is so you can replay levels.
Can you? I never tried.
No, you totally can.
Yeah, you can.
And then you can exit
absolutely.
sooner if you press start and then select. Yeah, you can. But you can't. If you missed, let's say you missed the pterodactyl, or let's say you got the pterodactyl that brings you to the key bonus stage, and you weren't able to get the key, you can't actually get that pterodactyl again.
Oh, it's like a once per turn kind of thing. Huh.
Yeah.
That seems fair, because we'll talk about difficulty and things later, but this game is pretty much a cakewalk, with the exception of some cheap stuff. But
if you take the time, it's a very easy game. The first time I played it kind of like a Contra, where I would just run and gun. Like I wouldn't care, and I was under the assumption I had infinite continues. So I was just like, fuck it, I'll die, go. And then halfway through the game, I game over. And it's on my Twitch if it's on my if you guys want to see that. But and then I played it again, kind of the same way, a little bit more safe, but then I kept dying, and then I game overed. And then on the weekend, I finally finished it, just playing it normal, not jumping at everything, not giving it, too much of a shit. But yeah, it's very easy if you take the time to get the keys and get the extra power-ups and get the extra lives and get, all that stuff. Because they throw health at you, like, all the time, right? So
yeah, I mean, the game it's quite liberal with its health, and I think that's something interesting that is carried over from the arcade version, but the makers of the port for the Super Nintendo version seem to have missed the point, because with the arcade version, there's this sort of how to describe it? You have a constantly depleting health bar for no reason.
Oh, I guess constantly dying?
Constantly dying.
Well, that's taken from Adventure Island, though, isn't it?
Yeah,
pretty much exactly.
Yeah.
In Adventure Island, you had to eat. You had to
yeah, but Adventure Island's also kind of, and maybe I guess the point is the same, where you're trying to generate a sense of urgency in Adventure Island, but in Joe and Mac, I just feel like you're getting jammed up constantly, especially in that first level of the arcade version, with pterodactyl aerial attacks and just a ton of Neanderthals, and it doesn't generate that same sense of urgency, like I need to keep moving. But whereas Adventure Island is practically a runner.
Yeah.
I see that as a very arcadey thing, though, like Gauntlet.
Oh yeah,
and Kadash,
absolutely.
Just eating your quarters that way.
Yeah, and I don't question the arcade doing that so much as I do I guess some of the carryover into the port versions, where no other version besides the arcade version had that, but certain ports got certain facets of that arcade version, which just seems strange when they're separated into their components. So let's take, for instance, the Genesis version is insanely hard, much like the arcade version. But
How
the
far
arcade
did you guys
version,
get in that?
I got to level 2.
I did not get to level 2.
I finished level 1. That's it. Yeah.
I got to the end of level 2.
Yeah,
that was pretty much it.
I honestly, I mean, we all played through to completion the Super Nintendo version, and I just kind of wanted to experience the gameplay to see, if there was anything noteworthy. I mean, I watched walkthroughs for the rest of it, but I just felt I needed to feel, if there was anything better, because I had spoken to some people who seem to revere the certain aspects of the Genesis to be the best, at least for a home console version.
I kind of think I agree. There's some things that are in the Genesis, like the charging up the attack and all that. It's just so insanely
straight
difficult.
From the arcade version. It's definitely more of a straight adaptation, and also the fact that you can. I like the fact that you can jump on enemies and kill them.
Yeah. I wonder. I don't remember much about the game, the Genesis version, but I know that the hitbox on the Super Nintendo version on this, what can you jump on and what can you not jump on, being very, very frustrating. Yeah. If you move a half a pixel over the edge of a rock or a guy, you're gonna get hit, and it's garbage.
Same goes for the Genesis version.
Is it the same?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Well, let's rein things in just a little bit. I wanted to talk specifically about the weapon pickups in the game, because that's kind of, especially in the Super Nintendo version, I found to be a pretty integral part to it identifying itself as its own thing, separate from the arcade version. So with the SNES version, you have a sort of inventory of weapons that you get. You'll drop power-up icons for killing enemies, or no, it's cracking open the dinosaur shells, right?
Yeah, they're eggs.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
And so they'll drop a stone sculpture of a burning log, or a stone wheel, or a boomerang, etc. There's a handful of them, and
a pork chop.
You'll collect those things. Yeah. You'll collect these things though, and you can cycle through them. And
I didn't figure that out. I had no idea.
I figured it out almost halfway through my cycle of the game. The last time I played, I was like, "Oh wait, select does something."
I forgot you could do that.
Yeah, I must have just hit the button, accidentally or something, because it seemed like for stage 1 I figured it out, but
because I would end up avoiding items because I would want to keep the fire, for example.
Yeah,
exactly.
Like Ghouls and Ghosts
that's how the
style,
game
basically.
was. Yeah. Ghouls and Ghosts is actually like something that I think of a lot when I was playing the arcade version of this. There's a weapon, I believe it's referred to as the flint, and it's essentially just an arrowhead, but it's quick and it's small, and you can rapid fire shoot it, much in the same way that you could the dagger in Ghosts and Goblins.
They have actually some crazy weapons in the. I mean, maybe we should talk about the weapons in the Super NES version first, just to see what they narrowed it down to. But like,
sure,
yeah, let's just mention those.
So each stage you start with a club, and the SNES version.
Yeah, and that's the only version you actually. You
actually
don't
do
get
have
a projectile.
Right. Yeah. And it's just the club, and it's useful, but nothing beats shooting a projectile. So you have tomahawks, which just like stone tomahawks. The aforementioned wheel, fire, a boomerang.
That's it.
And I feel like we're missing one. Is
flint,
that it?
The little arrow things.
No, not in the Super Nintendo version.
No, there's only 4.
Oh,
yeah, definitely not.
Right,
yeah,
right.
Yeah, it's super easy to get them mixed up.
So there's the drumsticks, there's the fireballs, the wheel, and what am I missing?
Boomerang.
Boomerang.
Yeah.
Okay.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So when I first started playing, and you guys tell me like what your experience was, but I took to that boomerang and kept it for most of the game until I got towards the end, and then I realized that there were some better options.
I was 100% fire and wheel.
Yeah. And then doing some research, those two things in the Super Nintendo version seem to be commonly, and I can attest to that too. As I got to the end of the game, it was like, oh yeah.
Well, the balance of the weapons is so weird to me though when you compare the different versions, because even in the arcade version, the fire has a little bit of rapidity to it. Like you can throw it more, like more times in a row, whereas it kills things really quickly in the Super Nintendo version, but it's very slow.
Yeah.
Yeah,
right. And you have to wait
slow.
You have to wait to either make contact or hit the floor for you to shoot it again.
Yeah, and it's the same with the wheels. Like you have to wait till the 2 wheels roll off screen, or at least one of them does.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And I didn't find that terribly frustrating. It just seemed like the cost of using that weapon.
Oh yeah.
But it was certainly made for interesting combat. I mean, whereas using the boomerang just kind of felt like easy mode, even though it doesn't do the same amount of damage as some of the other items, but.
I guess you can kind of swing it all over the screen and hope for the best.
Exactly.
Kind of thing.
Yeah.
I was wheel all the way whenever I can get it.
The wheel is great in those levels that have those moving platforms that go up and down because they kind of climb up the walls. So then, like, if you got something coming towards you, like one of those guys rolling, that come off screen, like when you're really close, like it's really
good because you can actually shoot them out and kind of follow them in those stages. Yeah, and it'll just take out enemies.
Yeah.
Frank, so you mentioned rolling, and that's actually one of the couple of special mechanics that Joe and Matt can use in the game. Would someone like to describe kind of how that works?
Are you talking about the accidental roll that you always do when you're not trying to?
And then you fall off a cliff or something?
Yes. So rolling is basically you double tap a direction, and they'll do a little ninja roll. But the thing is, like I said, it's pretty rare that you're... Well, I guess once you're better at the game, you're kind of trying to do it strategically, but more often than not, you're landing on an edge and trying to inch your way forward so you can do a precise jump, and then you roll.
Yeah, It's horrible.
Totally. Now, was that on Super Nintendo only?
I don't
know. No. Yeah, it's that originated with the arcade and then made its way to everything else, I believe. I'd have to double check about the Game Boy version. Oh man,
I wasn't able to do it on the Genesis. I guess I didn't try.
Yeah, well, it's not a double jump. I mean, I think you hold the button down. I could be wrong about that, but so you have this roll and you have this high jump, and I don't want to spend too much time talking about the roll, but there is a boss in the Super Nintendo version. The what was the type of dinosaur we decided
the
on
ankylosaur?
For that? Exactly, the ankylosaur, and I thought that was kind of a neat boss fight, and we'll go into it more in detail in a bit. But
for listeners that aren't dinosaur friendly, what does this look like?
Oh, sure. So an ankylosaur is they're short to the ground, kind of like an armadillo with a scorpion tail.
Yeah,
and spikes all over it.
And spikes, like a hard armored back.
Like kind of looks like that boss in Mega Man X.
Exactly.
Yeah. Armored Armadillo, was that what it's called?
Armored Armadillo, yeah.
the most clever name ever.
But I mentioned that boss fight in particular because that was a point where I found the most benefit in using that roll mechanic. Because he sort of does this drop, and then there's a bit of a bounce. And it's if you try to run beneath the bounce, oftentimes you'll get hit. And so a little pro tip for the listeners at home, use the roll on that stage because, it's easy to completely avoid getting hit with that move.
Also noted, if you're going to play the game, the rolling gives you invincibility frames sometimes and also hit. So you can actually do damage.
Oh wow! See, I never tried to come in contact with anything.
If you watch one of the speed runs, especially like the tool assisted one, there's like a auto scroller level on the water. There's a bunch of fish that jump out. He basically continuously like does the roll and just hits them as they come out.
That's awesome.
Yeah. So perhaps Dark Souls took their invincibility. They borrowed it from this game.
Yeah,
it's good to finally see.
Absolutely. I mean, I guarantee it.
Yeah. You heard it here first. Yeah. Miyazaki loves Joe and Mac.
So before we get out of the realm of control mechanics, I kind of just wanted to kind of let listeners in on our opinions of how the game handles. Overall, I found the platforming segments to be the most frustrating because you're so floaty. And it just doesn't feel very precise. It's kind of just a soft mess. Did anyone else have that similar experience?
Absolutely,
yes, yeah. There's actually a clip that I sent you guys when I was playing on Twitch, and it's on my Twitch again. Not to keep plugging, but twitch.com or twitch.tv/Hios_. But there's a level in the fire pits, or I don't know what you would call it, but near the volcano, and there's these platforms that keep going up and down, and then some of them they go down, they go off screen, and if you go off screen, you insta die, right?
Right.
But if you instant die, you don't start the level over. If you have continues, you just turn into a ghost. It goes da na 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 na,
and then you fly around,
and then you can fly around. Very limited, but you can do that. But what happens is that you can't. Sometimes, if you're dead and the platform goes up, you're not fast enough to go up with the platform, so you just spawn back into the pit, and then you instant die again. So that it's horrible. And then there's like guys jumping on top of your head, and so on and so forth. But that's another mechanic that I don't know if it was in the other versions that you turn into a ghost.
Yeah, no, it is there. And, I didn't complete the arcade version, but there was some certain elements about the ghosting that was confusing to me. I wanted to save this for the boss fight talk, but I feel it's kind of pertinent to this, is that when you die on the boss stage, so first off, we mentioned earlier that the stages in the arcade version, your health is constantly depleting. Well, that stops when you encounter a boss in the arcade version, and thankfully, because there's just no source of health and it would be a mess. But the unfortunate byproduct of that is that you, since there is no health, when you die, you have to start the boss fight over again.
No.
Yeah, like an absolute coin sucker, because and if you're having trouble with a boss, I guess you just get good, bro. Because there's no way around it.
Genesis version was like that too. It's very frustrating.
Yeah. That's horrible.
Yeah, I would say with the platforming, one of the really frustrating things is obviously the moving platforms that Frank mentioned are really annoying, but also the really narrow ones. I feel like the actual area that you can stand on is so thin, even thinner than the actual art.
Right.
It's so you're very prone to either rolling off or just kind of, if you choose poorly and decide to do a high jump when you should have done a normal jump, you're just going to fall right off it.
Yeah,
pretty unforgiving.
And with that's a big bad problem when it comes to platforming elements in a game, is that you need to have that general mechanic. Like, you need to have that all dialed in. The weight of your character, and I said this in Nemo, and I'll probably continue to say it throughout our episodes, but the character's weight, like the physics involved in jumping and landing and moving and stopping, if it's not good, then it's frustrating. And then when you combine that with something like you just described, where you have these tiny little platforms, you just don't even want to play anymore.
Well, I was just going to say, I think to me these kind of decisions reek of something that was designed with platforming as an afterthought.
Right.
Yeah. Or coming from the arcade where it's like, oh, we want your money.
Exactly.
But on the SNES version doesn't really translate very well.
No.
Well, but then you have the financial decision to make to say, okay, well, do we pay this team to rebalance this game?
No.
Because Joe and Mac needs to feel like Joe and Mac, even if Joe and Mac mechanics are bad. They need to feel the way that the arcade game feels, because at the time that this came out, it even says it on the Super Nintendo box about it being based on an arcade game, having arcade action.
Yeah.
So it needs to feel the way that the original felt. But there's no way that when a port is brought over that they're going to redial in everything. At best you can hope for things like checkpoints and overworld maps and things that weren't in there, but were a sound financial decision based on the success of Super Mario Brothers.
Right.
Which works for Super Mario Brothers, but didn't really work for this game.
Yeah.
Because if you die and you end up back on the overworld, you still have access to just bypass all the worlds you already did. So the checkpoints don't really matter.
Right.
Yeah, totally.
Like
I thought. Yeah.
I was going to say, if you game over, you start over. You lose your checkpoints. So it's absolutely useless. But go on, Brian.
Now, one part I thought was especially egregious. I think it was stage 9 or maybe it was 8. There was this section where it wasn't exactly like flowing lava, but it was like this red hot pits, and there was a bunch of pterodactyls that I think you were supposed to stand on top
I know
of.
exactly what you're
yeah.
talking about.
Yep.
The purple pterodactyls.
Did anybody complete that? Like, I don't know, standing on the pterodactyls?
Yeah.
No.
Oh,
yeah.
no.
It took me a few times to do it, but then, yeah.
No, I only had a few lives left at that point, and I was just like, I did it a couple times, and it's like, screw it. I just started jumping. I got hit on the lava, and then I got hit on the pterodactyls, and I got hit in the lava, but I eventually made it through with a life.
The thing I would do is I would end up hopefully timing my thing right, that I would jump out of the lava, get hit, but my invincibility frame would be there, so it would land on the pterodactyl, and then I would kind of keep going, fall off, and then rinse and repeat.
I never got on the pterodactyls. Well, then I started. I killed some, and then I got screwed, and I was like, okay, look, it's just gonna start jumping.
Yeah, that's all you can do.
Okay, so now we're going to dive into the level design and the sort of stage breakdown, stage by stage, of Joe and Mac, and particularly for the Super Nintendo. So the SNES version, arcade, and Genesis version all share the same 10 stages. And with the SNES version, you get bonus stages, but each of those stages, the main 10, have their own boss. And so we'll run through these here one at a time. We mentioned before that this sort of stage selection is based on an overworld map in the Super Nintendo version, and that the arcade has branching paths. Before we start talking about the individual stages, I kind of wanted to mention that you can have a very different experience in the arcade from playthrough to playthrough based on which of these branching paths you take. There's one stage in particular that gives you the option to ride a dinosaur. There are locations where the boss fight changes. I don't want to call it a boss arena, but the area in which you fight them looks different. So kind of a neat thing in the arcade version. Kind of strange that they did not give you more options in the Super Nintendo version, but it is what it is. And briefly, the NES, Amiga, and Game Boy versions all have 5 stages as opposed to the 10 stages in the main console versions. So kind of neat. But so let's kick it off with the first stage here. Joe, what do you got here?
Well, I just wanted to say real quick, because we were talking about the overworld earlier, and this got me to thinking while you were talking. I was listening also, but I was also thinking. The purpose of having an overworld. And I was also thinking, even though it's only the Super NES version that has one, to me it almost seems like kind of a value at, like, almost the illusion of value. Where you get a home game and it's like, hey, look how long this game is. It's totally not a short arcade game because you can select the stages and go, take your time and listen to this, groovy little music. while you go between stages.
But when you think of this being on the Super Nintendo and then it coming out at the same time as Super Mario World,
Yeah.
and it's so small. It's absolutely so small because I got to the end of the game and I was like, okay, this is the first map. But no,
I had the exact
game.
same experience.
Yeah.
I was like, yeah, oh wow, this is really going to open up. This is going to be massive.
Oh, as if
And
it's like
then,
an island in Mario
Yeah.
World.
Or yeah, exactly. Just like one of many.
Yeah, I was like, oh, okay, map 1 is done. And I was like, well, that was kind of beefy for a first map, but okay, sure. and then it's done.
Aren't you glad in retrospect that you were wrong?
Kind of, but I was like hoping maybe there'd be some different kind of levels because they kind of did the whole ice level, fire level, grass level, air level. So they did everything in the first map, and I was like, well, what are they going to do after? Are they going to, where is it going to go? But
Prehistoric times. Where are you going to go?
where else do you got? Yeah, what else do you got?
Well, speaking of prehistoric, I have dubbed the first level the prehistoric field. I had to create names for myself just because they don't really give you many descriptions here. There's no like stage one.
No, none of the versions name them. Yeah, it's weird.
It's kind of a disappointment.
What I think is also would stand out between all the development teams, because I'm assuming this is not all games weren't developed by the same team.
No,
they can't be. But I'm assuming they had a big board meeting, and then there was you must be able to walk up a Tyrannosaurus's back because every first level has that on every game.
And it's a big deal. I mean, like the sprite art is awesome. Like the layout of level 1 is really cool. I mean, it sets the tone of what Joe and Mac is going to look like visually, and yeah, that's thrilling. And it's kind of something that should have been utilized more in the game, like interacting with giant dinosaurs. I mean, it works particularly well in this one, and it might have thinned out as the stages went on if you kept doing it, but.
Or just different ones, like maybe, hey, let's have the auto scroller not on logs, but on one of those like Loch Ness looking ones.
Well, they did do that in the arcade version.
Exactly.
Did they? Okay.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, because that's
they
smart.
took your note.
I went back in time and told them.
Yeah.
Oh, good job.
Well, so the first level, like you were saying, is really straightforward, and it also, of course, as most first levels have to do, it has one of the most recognizable jingles. The song.
Yeah.
The first track is, I think it's pretty good. I think it kind of sets the stage. It's got it just fits. It fits the theme of caveman, prehistoric. It's got the nice drums and everything. It sounds way better than the arcade music, at least from what I heard of the arcade music.
Hey,
all the games, all the versions that I've played, the Super Nintendo and the Amiga ones had like the best music. Everyone else was kind of shit.
Yeah, I mean it's variations on a theme. There's different sound chips involved, I mean, a lot of people consider that Genesis version to be the best of the bunch. And, we can talk a little bit more about the soundtrack. I don't want to.
Let's.
Yeah, we won't go into it now. But it establishes the look. There's the really gnarly bearded cavemen again, and they make really. I've always thought they were really fun noises, but I played this all the time as a kid. The oh what whenever you hit them.
Oh yeah.
And then they go running away a lot of the times if you don't kill them. There's mini T-Rexes.
That's some great animation too.
Really good. And this first stage makes me think of Bonk's Adventure also, which we brought up before, mostly because of you walking on the back of the sleeping T-Rex at the end of the stage. Yeah. And one thing that I thought was really interesting is watching the arcade version. See, because I grew up with the Super Nintendo version, in which the dinosaur is always sleeping. And unless I'm mistaken here.
No, I believe he has his eyes. I believe he has his eyes open.
No, not in the Super Nintendo.
No, I think he's asleep the whole time.
In the Genesis one, yeah.
But in the Genesis and the arcade version, he kind of, as soon as you walk over him, he opens his eyes and he's like looking left and right. Like you woke him up, and that really helps set the atmosphere for the boss fight.
Yeah.
Because on the Super Nintendo one, it's not really. Is it alluding that it's the one that you walked on that you're fighting?
Yeah, it absolutely is.
In every version. I feel so.
That's canon.
Yeah.
that is the T-Rex. And
while we're mentioning that boss fight, it's important to point out that the Super Nintendo version, the stage doesn't change. Like you hop up on that second tier, if I'm not mistaken, right? It's just static the whole time.
Yeah.
And so you fight the T-Rex, and then you beat the T-Rex, and that's
it's really simple.
But whereas in the arcade version, Genesis version, and various other ones, almost all the other ones actually, with the exception of Nintendo, which really strips this game down to nothing. But yeah, with the arcade version in particular, as you sort of, they don't give you a health indicator on the T-Rex, or do they?
They do.
I'm not sure.
Genesis does, yeah.
Okay, so but as you're beating him down, there's not like indicators on at what point it does this, but the platform that you're standing on drops, like it sort of crumbles beneath you, which just adds some like excitement to the overall experience of fighting the T-Rex, right? Because like
it's like a second
you're
phase.
up high. Yeah. Well, it's like a second phase, but it's also like you're kind of safe and you're at eye level, and it's easier to dodge things. But as that platform begins to crumble, then you kind of have to change up the way in which you attack.
Yeah, it puts you in further peril, like as each level it drops.
Yeah,
which is like that's fun, and that's good game design. And it seems
it
weird
would have
to
been
me.
fun if the fight wasn't insanely hard.
Well, yeah.
Well, in the Super Nintendo version, so you're just standing up on the top of the platform, and it's really the only thing you have to watch out for is he spits out. Does he spit out cavemen and rocks?
he does.
Oh,
yeah,
Yes, he
both.
does.
Yes.
Yeah.
And you have to watch out for those, and every now and then he'll lunge forward, kind of, and charge.
Sometimes
at
he
you.
does his tail too.
Well, that's only if you're down by him,
Oh, okay, yeah.
close to him. And only a fool would stand by the T-Rex, my friend.
Exactly. I think that's fairly unavoidable too, which is another reason that being up on that platform is a safe place.
Yeah.
Because you can easily dodge the rolling of the enemies and whatever.
And
But another reason why the Super Nintendo version is easier is because the cavemen during the boss battles you can farm health.
Yes.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
I didn't know that.
Yeah,
okay.
yeah.
And
I just
also,
avoid them. Yeah.
one of the differences I thought was really funny looking at the arcade version is that, and the Genesis version too, is that you see the cave babe there the whole time.
Oh,
Exactly.
oh, really?
That
Is
was
she
the thing.
there?
Yeah.
Oh, right.
Yeah. Which is cool because like that's, I mean, as kind of corny as it sounds, like that's your treasure, right? Like that's,
that's
the
the
thing
whole
that you're,
point,
you're yeah. So I like that detail.
Do you think that Joe and Mac was influenced by Double Dragon at all?
I think everything was influenced by Double Dragon.
Yeah. That's a safe bet.
Double dinosaur.
Yep. Oh, that'd be a really good game name. Let's save
Double
that.
dinosaurs.
Don't publish that on the podcast.
All right, note to edit.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And also one final note. I'm sorry, I know I'm talking a lot about this first level, but I do get really excited about Joe and Mac. I know that I kind of like brought hell upon you all by choosing this game, but it does. I played this game a shit ton growing up. Like this is the game that I would just, if I didn't know what to play, I would just pop in Joe and Mac and play most of it or maybe get through it. It's just like a very easy game to play for me, and I loved all the animations and I love the iconic Bafoom that the T-Rex lets out, and I'll never forget it for the rest of my life, which is kind of a weird curse to have on yourself.
So, as a kid, Joe, would you like finish it?
Oh yeah.
Oh, okay.
But only a couple times. Normally I think I would probably play to the lava levels and then just kind of be like, or die or game over and be like, I'm done. That's
yeah,
fine.
that's it.
Yeah.
This maybe should have gone in a different segment, but to tell you the truth, the art and the general feel about Joe and Mac reminds me of something that of your Subhuman Zoids content.
Oh, I'm 100% influenced by Joe and Mac. Like,
Yeah.
especially like when the dinosaurs' eyes get really big and there's like one teardrop coming from them.
Yeah,
I just love that stuff.
that's awesome.
And that's without spending too much time talking about your art, you are obviously influenced by manga. I mean it's like and that's this game has a sort of Japanese look to it.
Oh, definitely. Yeah, you can see its
obviously,
roots for sure from Data East.
Yeah, it's obviously not a Western made game.
Yeah,
just
yeah.
because it's not shit. Number one, but
Take that, the West.
yeah, let it be
Yes.
known that Frank doesn't like Western SNES games.
Wow.
Yeah,
That's our spicy take segment.
yeah.
Ooh, it's spicy.
Okay, so the next level 2, we've dubbed the Sweltering Jungle. This one you have kind of a water base that you're going through. There's water spouts going up, and there are electrical fish, or if those are eels.
I guess
or
they're
fish,
supposed to be eels.
sure.
I'm not sure.
I think they're
Yeah.
fish because when they die, they have like
Oh,
they
yeah,
have like
yeah,
little
you're right.
fins on the sides.
Yep.
I don't
Yeah.
know.
Yeah, definitely.
Something interesting about the Genesis version, the water spouts, you can't stand on them.
Oh,
At
really?
least I wasn't
okay.
able to. Yeah,
No one got that
I
far,
lost
except for
a
you.
few. Yeah, right.
I definitely remember doing that in the Super Nintendo version, but when I played through the arcade version, I don't recall trying to do that. I think I just stuck to the platforms. Yeah.
But this one is pretty straightforward. What get introduced are these kind of little shop of horrors, man-eating
Exactly.
plants And you have little ones, which foreshadows the boss, which is Seymour, a big one. And,
Exactly.
I didn't do this in the SNES version, but in the actual NES version, if you get too close, it'll just eat you whole.
No way.
Yeah.
Really?
Yeah.
Yep.
And that's an arcade thing too.
Oh, that's awesome.
Okay,
and-
gotcha.
That's a missed
And it-
opportunity for the SNES again on a boss fight.
Right.
Yeah.
But this is
a
the
lot.
first time you get a few of these weapons. The fire weapon, that was the first time you get that.
No, you get it in level 1.
Really?
Yeah, but you got to
Oh,
jump
boy.
off a crocodile.
Oh,
You have to
there's that-
jump off a purple guy that's flying by, and then you have to do a high jump to get it.
What's the
Right,
first time that they really spoon feed it to
Yeah,
you?
yeah, it's
Because
right down there.
right
Yeah.
before the boss fight.
Yeah.
It's there, and it's like you're going to want to use this.
And
So,
it trivializes the boss because you can just duck and throw it underneath him, and it just hits
Yeah.
him.
You know what else trivializes the boss is the fact that you on the Super NES version you can just run behind him. And,
can you?
and just stand there and hit him,
yeah.
and even his arms flailing won't hurt you.
That's awesome.
Good stuff.
And
I like the
Yeah,
I like the pits that he shoots. It kind of looks like it reminds me of Symphony of the Night. There's an enemy that kind of looks like this that shoots these pits.
Yeah.
And it's kind of like the same kind of look to it. It's kind of cool.
This is another boss too that I have fond memories of the sound effects for, because he makes his little blah blah sounds, and then whenever he gets really hit, it's like it sounds to me it always says damn.
To me, I don't know if it's just my shitty memory, but I vaguely remember him going, "Yeah."
Well,
I'll have to look it up.
in the arcade version.
Either way,
he
I'm
says
glad
like,
that the
But I'm
Either
not
way,
saying I'm not saying that he doesn't say "damn," but I think he also says "yeah." I'll have to look it up. Anyways,
either way, I love the Little Shop of Horror connection, and I love that he's vocalizing. I mean, either way, it's a talking plant. So
yeah.
well, he talks more than the other bosses.
Yeah. The and so this guy, we've described this, and I'm sure if you're listening to this, you're probably imagining what we're talking about. But the beautiful sprite art for this massive green plant with like ruby red lips, opening its mouth and flailing these tendrils, these green tendrils around, and periodically he'll spit out these pits that like land into the ground. I guess they're seeds, really, and like they'll sprout out, and like a smaller version of itself will appear and attack. So that's the thing that kind of keeps you moving around in this fight. But like we said, you can easily get behind this plant and sort of trivialize it, but you end up taking an attack in the process, which is probably enough to keep most kids at bay.
So the next level we've dubbed the Dactyle Nest, and it is a very, very, very short level. It is an upwards moving level, and there's a bunch of enemies, but you can bypass them pretty quickly. You just got to do your high jump a bunch. Then there's these nests of bees.
Oh boy!
Really
Let's
annoying.
talk about the nest of bees.
Yeah.
Really annoying. If you're not smart enough, like we've mentioned before, I'm not real bright, and if you're dumb enough to leap into the area and think, oh man, I've got a boomerang, I'll just spam the boomerang, it'll be fine. Oh man, and if you're dumb enough to knock them down,
Yeah.
it'll shoot out bees, and
There's no point in even
much like
engaging
in real
them.
life.
Yeah.
No.
Yeah.
You-
Much like in real life, leave the bee nest alone.
And what I noticed with watching the speed run is that the way that they jump, they kind of have certain enemies still on screen when they spawn the bee nests, and sometimes they don't even spawn at all. So they kind of
spawning.
manipulate. Yeah, they
Yeah.
manipulate it, and then they just kind of bypass it that way, which is, I wish I knew how. But yeah, I usually get to like 1 or 2 hearts by the time I get to the boss at the top, which is just a giant pterodactyl.
This was nearly impossible in the Genesis version.
Was
Oh,
it?
I can only imagine. Yeah.
Actually, I reset the game, went back through the other, because you can choose to not go the B way. The other way is almost as hard.
The
but,
B way.
So I went the non-B way, and then I'd still I turned it off at the boss.
Yamo
It's just
B
stupid.
way.
But yeah,
Yeah.
that boss is very simple. It goes up and down, back and forth. It's one of the first clone bosses. I think it's the only clone boss, right?
What do you mean when you say clone?
Because there's the exact same boss later on in another level.
Oh, right.
Well, it's definitely not the only one because we'll see the T-Rex in some form a couple more times.
Yeah, but he doesn't look exactly the same.
Yeah.
This one's just a recolor. Like,
that's true.
I think he's orange on this one or yellow.
He's green on this one, and I think he's like orange, purplish later or something.
Yeah. And then sometimes he has eggs that he drops that has, other smaller pterodactyls.
Right.
And
you're smart if you can knock those out of the air. And this was a point where I think my utilization of the boomerang was most effective.
Yeah.
Because like you can kind of get up there and really it travels the furthest of all the weapons. So when you have the pterodactyl like sort of moving from left to right and dropping its eggs, you can take them out of the equation pretty quickly.
Well,
yeah, and the only thing that I would recommend if you're going to play this game is not to high jump, because you will continuously hit into him.
I always hit that thing, yeah.
Yeah. And by accident, like I always end up like, oh, I'm going to and then I hit into him and I can't do my attack. And then
Well, that was the frustrating thing, because you're aiming up to hit
yeah,
the
you have
thing.
to push up and then to attack, but then you accidentally jump and then you hit into him.
And we're talking about the ability to, to reach the pterodactyl in certain situations or not jump too high and run into it. But, something that would really amplify the difficulty of this, and Joe's got a note here, is that if you don't have a projectile weapon, in the Super Nintendo version at least, if you die on the way up to the tree, or if you come into the stage,
it's actually okay. So this is what happened, and I blame the fact that I hadn't played Joe and Mac in probably a decade or so. I somehow managed to game over by the time I reached the pterodactyl. Maybe after the first time, I don't know how it happened. I blame the bees. But anyway, I started the level over again, and I didn't think about going back to another level to select that to get a weapon. But I didn't have a weapon. There aren't any weapons on the climb, so.
Right.
And unlike the second pterodactyl fight, there's no weapon given to you at the top. So what you end up with is a club to fight this flying enemy, and it's almost impossible. You can hit him a few times, but yeah, needless to say, I died, and I was just like, okay, it's out of the question to get up there without a weapon.
Yeah, it makes it 100. It's a very easy boss made hard.
Yeah.
Okay, so in level 4, which we have dubbed Shred 'em Stream, it involves Joe and Mac making their way across kind of like a log flume ride, I guess. It's not an auto-scroller if I'm thinking correctly. Yeah, but it's still implied that you're moving across a body of water, some sort of river, and you're making your way through towards the boss at the end, and you're avoiding your typical Neanderthals, as well as the common video game trope of leaping fish, that are quite capable of damaging you in the process. And all of that culminates in a boss fight, which is a school of blue sharks, I guess. Some sort of prehistoric shark
dinosaur,
something like that.
Yeah, I mean, I'm sure there's some sort of closer technical term for them, but this is all very.
In 1991, I would have said plesiosaur, but I might have been wrong.
So somebody give me a breakdown on what this boss fight looks like, or how does it play?
So there's only four at a time on screen, and then they kind of just cycle below you, and then there is not much RNG, but they will kind of leap out, and then you have to like move your projectiles in a way that you kind of foresee where they're going to go to hit them.
I feel like it's complete RNG though. In their timing for jumping out.
It isn't, because I've seen a speed run where he times his boomerang hits perfectly.
Oh, that's cool. That's good to know.
Okay. Yeah, it feels random because I think it's kind of programmed to be not predictive, but I think if you know the pattern, you just know the pattern.
Well, it's kind of like it's like a large, because that's what the piranhas do throughout the level, is just randomly jump out of the water, and they kind of have a tendency to spawn right below you.
Yeah,
which
exactly.
It's a total life suck. This is one.
Like I mentioned earlier, I don't know if it was before the podcast or during, but during the speed run, I know I'm going to quote this a lot, but the guy continuously does a roll, and then it does damage, so he continuously hits them so he doesn't get hurt.
Wow.
The way I bypassed it is by using the wheel. Like you just spam the wheels, and then they hit
team wheel all the way.
Yeah, they hit those fish on the way up. So
That's smart.
But that's like using a heavy hitter in any other game where you're setting yourself up for some trouble if you whiff that shot.
yeah.
With the wheel. So give and take, but it is a cool strategy.
Yeah, it's. I find it easier to do that than to try to jump over them or hit them with a boomerang or something.
Moving on to level 5, which we have dubbed the Brachiosaurus Pit. Don't know how accurate that is for you dino nerds out there, but hopefully it's close enough. Someone's going to be like, actually, that's a brontosaurus. But anyway, it starts off with you scrolling downward, and you're true to the back of the box. You're dactyl gliding at the start of this level.
That's right.
So,
peek in the beak.
Yeah, peek in the beak.
Peek in the beak.
So you ride this down, and from the top of the screen, boulders are dropping down. And unless, if you're foolish enough to stay at the top of the screen, you're basically going to get pelted for a life's worth of energy before you even make it to the boss. But mercifully enough, the boss is waiting for you just a few screens down. So it's not long, and you land on a log bridge, and out comes the Brachiosaur in one of what I think is one of the few fair, easy pattern boss fights in the game that's just very straightforward.
Yeah.
Yeah. And I was just thinking about this, but they give you two throw items on the way down, the same ones, which is the basic one, like the hatchet. But I'm wondering if you both avoided those and you didn't have a projectile, how hard that boss would be.
Very extremely.
Yeah, I wonder because he's out of range in a lot of instances.
You have to do you have to do a high jump, and then you would have to be like really on him to give him that little hammer hit, right? It would be hard,
right? Yeah, no, it would definitely take some expert timing. I have to imagine that someone's done some sort of playthrough of this game with no projectiles.
I'd like to see it. Yeah.
Oh, that'd be a great run.
Yeah. So one thing I want to point out too with this, we're calling it a brachiosaur. I'm not quite sure. It's the one with the ridge on his head, right?
Yeah.
I just looked it up. It is a brachiosaurus.
Yes.
Okay.
Good job.
However, brachiosaurus is not a water dinosaur. So.
Nor was a brachiosaur's neck made of a completely spherical ball.
By the way, can we actually take a moment to talk about ball necks? Because that's another standout feature.
That was where I was going at with it, was that this is a first point in the game where you see a long-necked dinosaur with these sorts of this weird posable ball neck. I guess it was the easiest thing to animate.
Yeah.
It's something that'll come back up later on, and it kind of plays into the very, very, very final stage. But I like something about it. Like it feels like a comfortable pair of shoes.
It feels like
a familiar thing.
It feels like it was created out of necessity, but it was designed deliberately to be like, hey, you know what? This is our stylistic choice.
Yeah,
I think
it's like we're playing
it
a video game.
They could have easily made those sprites overlap one another and not have gaps like that. They're not using any data. Like the sprite itself is its size, right? They could have easily just put all three of them over one another and have them meld into one another. So it was obviously an obvious choice that they did.
Yeah.
Well, there you have it, Data East. Frank says you suck and you didn't do
Go
your
back
job.
to game school.
Well, I'm not saying it sucks. I'm just saying they could have done it
impressive.
better.
Kind of reminds me. Was it Clay Fighter? Or
Vector Man.
Vector Man.
Yeah, Vector Man's the first
Well,
thing that comes to mind to me.
Balls 3D.
Balls
is
also,
definitely-
yeah.
Balls with a Z, right?
Yeah.
Of course.
I mean, in the 90s, balls were very in.
Okay, so the next level is the ice level. We're dubbing that the crystalline caverns. Did anybody actually notice any kind of slippage on the when you're Joe's walking around? Did that actually have anything?
I thought it was
I thought so as
inconsistent,
well,
though.
but it was very slight. It wasn't
At first,
very
I was
annoying.
like, wait, is it actually happening, or is
Right.
it just Joe being kind of messy as usual? But
Or maybe we're Pavlovian about it, and we're trained to go, oh, ice means I'm going to bust my ass.
yeah.
Right.
Or we have like Stockholm syndrome, and we're just kind of just thinking that Joe, no matter what, is going to slip.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
So if I'm remembering,
it was very subtle, and so it wasn't that bad. It wasn't too annoying.
The only part that were kind of annoying that is those spiky parts that you kind of have to like do some platforming, but you're kind of loose, and then you end up in the spikes.
Right.
And this is the stage where you begin by falling into it. Am I remembering that correctly?
I think that's actually only in the in the arcade version, the end of the previous boss, I believe, or one of them. I think it's like a different route because the ground shakes and you end up falling down. Oh yeah, because they have the ankylosaur before the crystal caverns in the arcade version, and then the ground breaks and you fall below the lava area, and that's the ice.
Okay. No, this one you just start there.
Yeah,
this is great. Everybody's existing in like a few different dimensions at once. And it's hard
it's actually really confusing.
Yeah,
I wonder if in the Joe universe, like if they kind of travel between universes at some point.
Poor Mac, he doesn't get. No one ever talks about Mac.
Does Data who owns Data East? Who bought Data East?
Oh boy, that's something worth looking up. I couldn't say.
Somebody owns this IP, and they could bring it back.
They actually tried to a few years ago. I think it was like 2011.
But it wasn't Data East. No, someone licensed it. It fell through
because they posted. They had like designs posted for Joe and Mac and everything. I can't think off the top of my head who the studio was, I want to say that it was a Western take, kind of
surely
like kind of
like River City.
Yeah, and like Wonder Boy, like the new one of that, which was like I think European maybe. So I think it was one of those deals, but it fell through clearly because we're not playing Joe and Mac. 3 right now.
Did the Kickstarter fail?
Based on the concept art, it's for the best. So in this stage, the crystalline caverns eventually lead you to possibly my favorite boss.
Yeah,
fight.
this one was gnarly. This is I was stunned when this happened. You're just fighting this big mammoth. And just shooting him in the face, and all of a sudden his tusks fly off, and you're like, okay, that's fine. And then about half of his face,
his entire trunk comes off. It's completely
rips off.
Like a clean cartoon snap, like a jagged snap, kind of just pops right off.
And every other boss that you kill kind of just goes off screen somewhat. They kind of they linger a little bit but go off. But his corpse just hangs on.
It's weird. It's like it's the only really instance where it's more than cartoonishly gruesome. And I was thinking while I was playing it, like that this is the kind of carnage a caveman ninja would be likely to unleash.
Absolutely, yeah.
And arguably, I mean, if we want to get science nerd about this, the woolly mammoth would probably have been the only boss in this game that would have coexisted with cavemen.
Just the only boss, yeah.
So
depending on the worldview,
ice caves probably wouldn't be the home of a woolly mammoth. If we're gonna get technical.
Well,
the final home.
Were you there?
Yeah, exactly.
I think they were.
Yeah, they should have had him defrosting, right?
They were not cave dwelling, as far as I know.
That's a big cave, though.
It is a pretty big cave. I give it that.
I think it'd have been fine.
He's just trying to get out. Instead, he got his face ripped off.
It's Joe and Mac blowing it.
What's funny about this boss is I actually realized that I had a false memory about it when I was playing it. Despite the carnage, for some reason, when I got to it, I was like, okay, here's the part where the mammoth busts out of the ice wall, in the back of the screen. And then he came out of the right, and I was like, oh, I guess that doesn't happen in this game.
That was all in your memories, I guess.
That's a pretty good memory, though.
No, I should have kept it that
cherish it and hang on to that one.
It's a shame. It's a shame that they don't show the girls in the back on the SNES version, because that would have been great to just see this huge mammoth just hanging out with this babe, and then he's like, "What are you doing here?" And then starts getting his face melted off.
He sounds a little like Macho Man. What are you doing here?
Hey, brother.
So I feel like this is a good opportunity, since you bring the girls back up in the context of the boss, for me to share my theory, is that these Neanderthals are worshiping the bosses in each of these stages, and that these girls are offerings to them.
I guess that makes a lot of sense.
Why else would they have just left them there? If they took them and tied them up, went through the trouble to tie them up, I'm
going to say that's canon.
Who unties them?
Who unties? Oh, well, Joe does, or Mac.
No, because they just show up.
Mind.
Well, no, but in the arcade version, when you beat the boss, I believe their ropes come snap untied, and I'm going to say the power of the boss being defeated, or maybe the power of the boss has been released from these girls, and they're just free to fall.
Could be.
One thing that I want to note, and it's on boss from the next level, but I want to say it before I forget. It's the clone of the pterodactyl, but once you kill him, the woman comes from the right, which is a cliff, and you don't see her on screen. So she walks on from basically walking on air.
Maybe she was hanging there the whole time.
Maybe.
That's an obvious sign of miscommunication. Somebody screwed the pooch on that and like said, okay, well, we have this awesome stage. Look, it's a cliff. And then the guy's like, well, you remember to put the girl in there, right?
Okay, I'm going to take you guys to the meeting room in Data East. You know, they're in crunch right now for Joe and Mac. It's circa 1990. It's the Super NES version.
Walk us through that, Joseph.
And they said, hey, one guy comes in, you know, like a designer. He's like, hey, man, you guys programmed this weird. You know, she just comes in at the edge of a cliff. And the guy looks at him. He's smoking a cigarette. He hasn't shaved in a week. And he goes, who gives a fuck?
If it bothers you so much, go edit it yourself. Level 7 is Sheer Shimmy, and it's another upwards platformer. Another really short upwards platformer. You just go up this cliff, like I was mentioning on the other section. There's just a bunch of Neanderthals. There's no bees this time, thankfully. There's just dudes rolling around and one dude rolling a big boulder down. And then you go up, and it's the copycat boss, which is just a little bit faster version of the pterodactyl that throws eggs. Goes up and down, back and forth. He does this move where he kind of jets on the bottom and the middle of the screen,
right?
Which is kind of hard to avoid because your button inputs are kind of laggy. So,
and the timing is very quick from when he disappears off screen to when he flies. Like the rate at which he leaves the screen and the rate at which he comes back in is very different.
And it's not like in Mega Man X where you had like Storm Eagle giving you like a audio cue that he was coming in. Like
right.
He just does it. Like
well, not to mention, I mean, if you want to compare the two, like Mega Man X, like the stage size in comparison to the sprites is massive. So I mean, it's telegraphed from a mile away with Storm Eagle. But
this one is just like, oh, there's a guy in your face, and then you get hit. Even if you did do a high jump, I don't even think your high jump speed is not fast enough to even jump over it.
Yeah, you have to do a regular jump. Yeah. Which is it's not what you would think to do. Yeah.
No, and by nature, like every time, if I'm not holding up, like I'm not playing the game. I was continuously high jumping. I don't know why. I think I got so like PTSD on falling down pits that I needed to have some clearance in my mind. So I needed to go more up in the air and then telegraph where I was going.
I actually thought this version of the boss, maybe it was just the experience of playing the first one, and I thought it was a little easier of a pattern. Not that the first one had that difficult of a pattern, but the first one had this tendency. It had a different off-screen move. It had one where it shrieked and then it jetted even faster, like across the very bottom, and it kind of, you didn't know when it was going to go into that version of the pattern. With this one, I found it easy to just, as long as you can do a regular jump over him, then you could do that, and then all you have to do is duck for the next where he goes, one higher or like a few pixels higher than that. So it was a little more reliable to me. It was kind of like rote memory for doing his pattern.
I got really lucky and pattern locked him on the one that he just goes left and right really slowly across the screen.
That's good.
So I was able to kill him really fast. So.
Okay, so level 8 we have titled the Flamin' Hot Cheapskates stage, and this is the one involving the volcano, is that right?
Yes.
So somebody walk me through this, because like the fire stages towards the end kind of start to blur together.
Yeah, they kind of meld together. This one is the first one that has the what is alluded to have like the they go up and down. So it's supposed to be like I don't know, a seismic.
Yeah, the platforms are like the earthquake.
Oh, right.
Right. Yeah. Like in Super C.
Yeah, but the screen doesn't shake or anything, so it's kind of just these platforms going up and down. But they also introduce a new enemy, which is these little like kind of raptors. I don't know if you guys remember.
Yeah, which is funny because they don't. I think in the just to not to jump ahead too far, but the boss of this is another T-Rex, and I think it's, correct me if I'm wrong, but I believe in the arcade version he actually barfs out those little dudes.
Gosh, I think so.
Yeah, and which so in this version, I believe he just barfs out more. It's more of the same, right? It's more like boulders and cavemen because that's all he can do.
I don't even think he does cavemen.
He does. Okay, it's just boulders. Yeah.
Yeah. On the second one, I don't think there's cavemen.
Yeah. So I don't know. I wish they had kept these enemies in here more. Because they're not annoying, and it's kind of nice just to have a little variety. So I would love to have seen more mixing it up with the enemies.
They have in this level that I notice is they have the baiting of the meat on fire.
Oh yeah,
like they have these like little like fire pits.
Oh yeah,
and they just throw a huge chunk of health on it, and then you're like, well, fuck, like I'm gonna lose half my health trying to get it, so I'm not even gonna bother.
Is this the same stage that and there's the section where you first come out and you're on a platform sort of in the middle of the screen, and there's a purple pterodactyl like flying below the platform, and you have just a moment to like get on it.
That's one of the next ones.
Okay.
This one is the one that kind of starts like it looks like a bridge. You can see the volcano in the back, and then they introduce the bonfire like really fast. It's just there, so I guess you can kind of get hit by it by just touching it, I guess. But then it jumps right into seismic up and downs, and then these like kind of tilty go up and down that have like boulders that go up. And
one thing that I noticed in this, and again I might be mixing everything up because now I have 1,000 versions of Joe and Mac in my head, and it's driving me insane.
We should have really like put a hold on checking the other ones out and just talked about.
I mean, I think it makes for interesting conversation, but at the same time, like my mind is a complete mess, and I'm gonna have to go on a detox after this. But I know that they're more prevalent in the other versions, but I feel like in this level they really introduced more of the vehicle-based cavemen.
Yeah,
sure. The ones flying the little the flying
and driving.
Right?
There's driving ones too.
The driving ones were on the bamboo one as well, like the river one.
Okay, yeah. Oh, that's right. Yeah.
Right.
That's where they were first introduced. But yeah, I think there's a flying one.
We should definitely talk about those enemies though, because I think they're awesome.
They're awesome, and they're more prevalent on the other versions because I remember playing the Genesis one, and they were right in the first level.
And they're so cool.
Yeah. No, you're right.
Exactly what I want in a caveman enemy is, and the fact that when you attack them enough, you hit them enough times, and you destroy their vehicle, and they kind of like fly out of it like still seated, and they're with that expression, the expression like, oh my god, he just destroyed my vehicle. Like, holy shit!
And they have
true
goggles,
Wile E. Coyote fashion,
and they have like goggles on.
Yeah,
and
the flying ones have the aviator kind of look to them.
Yeah.
That's definitely a thing that the Flintstones invented, was the idea of
big rock cars,
technology.
Big stone wheels. And
I will say that I don't think that, other than what I said earlier, I don't think the boss is really even worth that much discussion. I don't know if you guys have anything to say about him.
It's just it's a ball neck T-Rex that shoots the big rocks out. Like he spits out the big boulders,
and he does that bafoom.
And then bafoom, and then you hit him, and then his eyes roll back into his head, and he looks straight to the sky, and he's like, ah.
This is one you can't do this on one of the last ones, but you can stand under him pretty reliably and just shoot straight up.
Right, I remember that.
Yeah, he won't touch you.
Yeah. So level 9, we have what we've dubbed the Cliffs of Despair, which I think is an apt title because it has some of the most annoying platforming in the game. Specifically I talked about this earlier in the show, but really narrow landing points for platforms that you have to very precisely either small or high jump on. And there's also flying pterodactyls above you, and it's just a complete cluster.
This is that one that I was talking about where you have to land on top of the pterodactyls, or is that the previous one?
I think this is
the one,
for sure.
Okay, yeah. This one.
And this is the one that introduces these jets of lava coming out that if you're smart enough, you won't jump on them. But if you're introduced to the jet of water, you might think, oh, I'm going to jump on top of it. That's going to be a fail.
Nope.
It's a very short level too, actually.
Yeah, that's something I want to point out. Like as we're going through these stages, where it may seem to the listener like we're getting briefer and briefer about the description of each of the stages, but these stages are absolutely designed to be an arcade game.
Yeah, super
quick. It's brief and it's difficult and it's a quarter muncher, and then that's why the Super Nintendo one is so forgiving, because they decided to not deplete your health, to give you tons of health when you do get hit, and so the whole thing is just so I just wanted to quickly say that.
And a pro tip that I've seen from a speedrun, if you do your double tap roll against a wall that is like your height, you will climb that wall while rolling.
Really?
Nice. So there's like a part in this level that has like these kind of steps, and they have like these dudes like jetting down rolling, and I dealt with them with the wheel because the wheel would climb the walls, but I just watched the guy do it. Like he just climbs up and hits into them, and it's like cakewalk.
Oh, that's awesome.
It's really cool.
Nice.
Yeah.
So the boss of this level is the previously mentioned ankylosaur, and
that's right.
I agree with what Brandon said earlier in that it is kind of a clever design in some ways, but my memory about this boss holds true in that it takes forever to kill. It's just like
comparatively for sure.
It's one of those things where these bosses, there's no really clear it's like the health bar isn't reliable because each bar takes probably sometimes with this boss maybe 4 or 5 hits to even knock a bar off.
Well, the thing is he has like a hit window. Like that's it.
He's armored. I mean, so it's a classic gaming trope of like this enemy, you can't hurt him until
he opens up.
Till X happens. Yeah.
And then if you don't have the fire, you're gonna hit him forever. Like you need the fire to kill him.
Who wants to describe this dude's
remember
pattern?
I can do it. So and I actually. So let me describe it, and then I'm going to add about the difference between the arcade and the Super Nintendo version. But so the Super Nintendo version has a platform in the middle of the stage, and the ankylosaur it will stand up and expose itself to you. Jesus,
he opens his coat.
My brain didn't. I didn't process that. But he makes himself open to an attack, and then he'll turn back into a ball, so he kind of curls up, and that's back to the armadillo comparison, and he will bounce around. And because there is a platform in the middle of the stage, you can avoid many of those attacks by just dropping off the back side of the platform and running beneath it. But sometimes he'll get on the second tier down, the floor, and then it becomes a whole other thing. So
and sometimes he jumps like off screen, and then will land right in the middle of the level.
Yeah, and I liked this boss fight. I did. It was probably my second favorite of the bunch, just because it was the point that that roll mechanic became relevant. And, I would just roll out of the way, and I thought that was kind of cool, and I felt it was I wish it was a thing that I don't care to go back and try to play the game again and attempt to utilize that mechanic in regular stage combat, but I think I wish it was a thing that the game kind of like steered you in the direction of a little more.
And it's one of the only bosses that wasn't a clone and really stood out. Like he looks different, and he has like a cartoony face when he gets hit, like more so than the other ones. I don't know. I like him the best. Like he's
cool.
He's very different. Yeah.
All right, so the next level, we've done the Boneyard. It's a very drab, kind of stormy background. I do remember seem to have some lightning that kind of comes down and hits you with like really no kind of telegraphing or anything.
No, and you need to be quick about it too, because like it is in that first section. That seems like a game design issue where it's like, let's get you moving. Let's set the premise. Like this is a scary stage. Like it's foreboding because of the darkness and like the constant dinosaur skeleton bones everywhere. And so that lightning definitely seems like a screw you kind of a moment because they give you health almost immediately after. So it's like smoke and mirrors. You know?
Here it is. Oh,
And lightning's, I mean, think about it. Lightning in video games is never, ever fair. Like, we got Batman. If you remember. Yeah, the Joker fight where you have lightning calling down. It's like...
The Ninja Gaiden fight
really
with, I mean, even the boss is trivial. Like, his lightning's basically undodgeable.
yeah.
Right. Yeah. Totally.
It's always a scapegoat.
Yeah.
Yep. I don't have anything more to remark about this. But as you fight through, you eventually get to another version of the T-Rex, except this one is a bony one.
Yeah,
That's right.
And after you take out a chunk of his health, his bones explode.
Right.
That's pretty much it.
Yeah, I think it was like, there's his segments of vertebra kind of drop and bounce, right?
Yeah, and then they recollect.
And then they hit you. Yeah.
Yeah.
But
and then eventually he dies.
It's kind of, I found it's kind of like, I don't know. I thought it was kind of cheap the way that they, it's really hard to find a good place to just make sure you avoid the bones.
Yeah.
I don't know if you guys had that trouble. Like, I was like, am I stupid? Did I forget how to play this?
Oh yeah, as they rain from the sky. Yeah, there's no way. I mean, I looked and looked for an opening, and it was like, okay, you can't get too close, and there's like a little path, but there has to be some sort of. I'll have to watch a speed run after this because there's got to be a way to avoid it.
My best luck was down in the bottom left corner, like get off that top bone, and then I kind of stayed a little bit, not all the way to the left, but kind of like slightly to almost all the way to the left, and I was able to not get hit too much. But then after that, he has a final like move too, where his head starts jetting after you, and that's really easy to avoid. So that's kind of not a non-issue.
From the speed running, they don't dodge it. They do a roll that gives you an invisibility frame, and they just roll through it.
Damn roll.
Yeah.
See that there you go. That's there's your way to make this game a little more interesting. Is to try to
be better at it than
pull
us.
out some more. Yeah. Well, yeah. But to use mechanics, it's the get good bro thing, right? I mean, it's using the thing, it's Dark Souls all over again. Use those invisibility frames. And,
like we said earlier, Miyazaki loved Joe and
Mac.
Mac
He couldn't stop
to the
playing
point
it.
that he made a 3D version of it.
You heard it here first.
And then the designer came up and said, "Hey, should we make this less like Joe and Mac?" And he was like, no, shut the fuck up.
Original concept art for Dark Souls, little known fact, and it was nothing but cavemen. It was no medieval fantasy.
They all look like Andre.
Yeah, and that's why the Asylum Demon it looks kind of like a dinosaur.
Yep.
That's right.
Full circle.
And that's why there's a great club in the game.
Holy shit.
Damn.
Oh,
See?
wow.
All the connections. I'm unraveling it right now.
Yeah, and that's why the strength build is the only build that's worth playing.
That's right. The whole deprived class and everything.
Oh my god, yeah, deprived class.
Yeah, that basically is just caveman
Joe and
class.
Mac are not deprived, though. They're like the least deprived caveman in the entire game. Everyone else is. Like, it's you versus the deprived class for the entire game.
But that's all subjective and in the eye of the beholder.
Sure.
The guys that the babes like, they're not deprived, right? But that's debatable. So the next level is going to be, we dubbed it Boneyard 2, The Bonening, because it is essentially just a sequel to the first one, and not to keep confusing the listeners, but this level is the one that is a pit of lava that you have to jump over. That has the purple pterodactyls. We've said this for the three last ones. I've been watching it on YouTube.
The last third of this game really blends together to me.
It's such a mess. Yeah, the fire levels all blend together, and these two bone levels blend together as well. But it's also the one that has the most frustrating platforming because they have all these like kind of pillars that come out of the ground, and they're like pixel perfect jumps that you have to make. But you jump, you do your ninja flips, and then you miss them. And it really puts all your skills to the test, I think, this one. Because even the further levels that we're going to talk about, they're not that hard compared to this one. They're pretty good.
Yeah, well, I mean, that's a good opportunity, right? Like, let's talk about the boss on this stage, and then we'll quickly move on.
Yeah, so the boss on this stage is a rinse and repeat on the T-Rex. The hell it is. Yeah. It's the gray T-Rex, except it's red. That's it.
Yep. This is the most annoying T-Rex, and it has the most health, too.
Yeah.
Right.
He doesn't really do much more differently other than he sometimes hits you. Like, that's pretty much it. His balls bounce back.
Yeah, and you know what? I'm sure you guys noticed this because it's hard not to. But there's actually a platform right behind you.
No, there isn't.
Yeah, there is. It's invisible. It's like it's off screen, but you can stand on it. Yeah, if you, it's like pixel perfect. If you like, so the reason the boulders, let me give
bounce back.
Let me give the listeners a visual. So this T-Rex comes in from the right this time, and he spits either boulders or rolling cavemen. And the cavemen, you can stop, hit him a couple times, and farm health, which is good. But the boulders, it takes a few hits to crack them, so it's not worth it. And what they do, and while the cavemen roll off screen, I believe because they roll up this platform I'm talking about, the boulders bounce off of it and come back. So it makes them a little harder to dodge. And
pro tip, though, if you roll into the boulders, you instant crush them.
Oh, that's a really good tip. I wish you had been standing over my shoulder watching me play and giving me these.
No kidding.
I didn't do this. This is me watching the speedrun as I'm talking now.
But yeah, I noticed I kept getting caught on this platform, and then I realized it didn't help that much. But if you kind of jump in a certain way and land, you will actually stand. It looks like you're floating in midair, but you can stand on this platform.
Oh, wow, yeah. I didn't know that. That's cool.
So,
but yeah, that's a copy paste boss, and then the next level we dubbed "Up in Your Guts."
And the reason we called it that
is because the after you kill the boss, his head is open, and then you walk into it.
Yeah, it's implied you're climbing inside.
I must have taken a drink at this point because I didn't really catch that, and all of a sudden I was like, I was wondering why we're in this alien. It looked like there's some alien level.
Well, this is another.
Yeah, it's a Contra level.
This is actually comes back to the beginning when I said the first stage reminded me of Bonk's Adventure, and this is also a very Bonk's Adventure because you go in the dinosaur's mouth. And I was also thinking, what are the logistics of going through a ball neck?
Right.
You just teleport from ball to ball.
At no point are they connected.
There's portals between balls.
Yeah, interdimensionally.
So let's talk about Up in Your Guts, the final stage.
Yeah. Very Contra.
Yes.
I have to say.
Yeah.
That was my initial, like when I got to it, because I played this game briefly as a kid and,
didn't get that far.
I think I rented it and I was over it. So this one involves you being inside the dinosaur. You're walking through its esophagus or, whatever, heading to its heart.
Its guts.
Yeah, you're in its guts. And there's a wall. It's pretty neat because there's like tears in the wall of the throat. And, you can see cells moving through it. And
it's like cilia moving.
Yeah. It looks like a bunch of donuts being pushed around, actually.
But this is where that the wheel, as you mentioned before,
the wheel
comes in real useful.
Quintessential in this level for those bouncing dudes. Like I guess you could kind of do it with a boomerang, right, Brandon? Because I think you did it with a boomerang.
Well, at this point in the game, I was definitely a true believer of the stone wheel. I mean, I had given up on the boomerang when I got frustrated with certain enemies that just took too many hits to kill. But I did use it for most of the game.
Okay. Yeah, and the boss is essentially a demon.
Right. So
an imp, I guess.
The red armor. Another Ghosts and Goblins reference.
Exactly. And boy, I now that you mentioned that, I really wonder if this didn't have some influence on that. Because, so let me paint a broader picture, or a more detailed picture, rather. So you step into the boss arena, and there is a small shriveled heart, I guess. It's some sort of pulsating organ. That is
not big enough
to the ceiling.
Definitely not big enough to keep a big T-Rex alive.
Yeah. No,
it's a very small heart,
and not shaped really anything like a heart.
No.
It's like a fleshy tumor with pipes coming out.
Well,
of it
maybe it is a tumor. Maybe this is like
shit. Yeah.
Well, it could be.
Only the anatomy student would know that. I didn't know that problem.
But so you step into this room, and there is this heart, and the arcade and all versions have the same thing. All roads lead to Rome, right? And you get into this area, and in the Super Nintendo version, a red devil appears, and I guess it's implied. I don't know if anyone else gathered this, but like the red devil is tormenting this dinosaur.
That's what it seemed like.
That's why this dinosaur is behaving that way. Yeah, and that's kind of tied into my idea of like the Neanderthals like worshiping maybe this demon. Like maybe that's like
the demons, the demon gods control the dinosaurs, and thus they are revered.
Yeah, I mean that doesn't seem like too much of a stretch, but I mean there's nothing really to
Brandon,
support it.
when is your fan fiction coming out?
very soon. Stay tuned to dokidokigameclub.com, and we'll soon have a fanfic section.
My big question on this is that at some point so when he comes into the arena, he's 4 pieces. He's 4 ghosts. He becomes 1. And then halfway through the battle, he separates into 2. He pokes himself, and then it turns into Joe. Or not Joe, but Mac.
Mac, yeah.
I think it's an illusory attack, if anything. But here's a thought. How many different bosses are there in the game? So there's the T-Rex, the pterodactyl. Okay, never mind. This kills my theory. Well, maybe. My theory was going to be that those 4 devils are all from the different boss types.
No, there's
there's too many.
Yeah. They're not. I think it's just like an illusion. Maybe he's coming in really fast.
Yeah.
And like
I think we're also overthinking
your
it.
eyes.
Yeah.
But
so then let's continue on then with this demon. So you fight the demon and you beat the demon, right?
Yeah.
And
you get a babe.
You get a babe, and then the demon comes back to life.
Mm-hmm.
Or it gets more blue.
Yeah, like more of a purpley black color. Yeah.
Right. And then
you
gets
have to
different moves.
Fight it again. Yeah, it gets a whole new set of moves, which is really cool.
The fire rings are
It's
cool.
actually a really fun boss fight, and it's well designed, and I didn't find it annoying at all.
No.
Absolutely. And I think this is the one place where the SNES version really outshines the arcade and all the other versions for that matter, because this is the only one where the final boss is this demon who has these two forms and the 2 separate sets of moves, and the regular version is this strange alligator man. He kind of looks like he looks like a.
I'll tell you exactly what he looks like because I thought about it. You're talking about how he looks in the arcade game?
Yeah, in the Genesis version,
he looks
and the Amiga version.
He looks like one of the cavemen wearing like an Akira Toriyama design, like Dragon Ball Z enemy costume, like Cell or something. Like,
okay,
he looks like the armor is just like that. It really blew my mind. I was like, that's such a weird choice for this final.
Yeah, but it's got like this hairy, bushy head on top, and then like a dragon tail coming off or an alligator tail.
Yeah.
Rather.
Is it the same type of battle, or is it a different moveset?
Nope, he's on the ground. He has he's a much bigger sprite and has like a jumping, like a big double jump, kind of a flipping attack, like most of the. I think he's just supposed to be some sort of evolved Neanderthal, or mutated Neanderthal.
And he's inside the stomach of the T-Rex.
Yep. Yeah, in the same chamber with the heart and everything. So
weird. Does he sometimes poke
it's worth
the
watching
heart?
a video of. I don't think so.
No.
I don't recall that part. If so, but
I
it's
like
very
the
different.
I like the idea that the SNES dev team were just like, you know what, Ghosts and Ghouls is,
Ghouls and Ghosts.
Yeah, Ghouls and Ghosts is, it's awesome. Let's just put Brent in there and then
yeah. So that's it. In the SNES version, you beat the demon and you're rewarded with a cutscene for your efforts. And once again, my memory of which is quite blurred. I can say for sure, though, that with the end of the arcade version, you get the branching path option again. And depending which of the 3 you get, there's some slight variations to the ending, the cutscene at the end. But regardless, whichever version you're playing, it all results in the same thing, which is to say Joe and Mac save the day. The girls have been rescued. In some versions of the game, the girls are chasing after Joe and Mac now. Like, they're ready to, show them their appreciation for being rescued.
Give us some smooches.
Yeah, smooches, the Super Nintendo version. And some of them, I don't think that they were chased in all of them, though. And you get various sprite art pictures of Joe and Mac and like a zoomed in, close up buddies kind of emotion, and then there's credits and whatnot. For some reason, and I didn't investigate this too much, but the end of the Amiga version has like a bunch of scrambled text, like letters bouncing around, and then you get like the secret code or password or whatever.
Okay.
And if you search on YouTube for it, it says Dolomite Sprinter. And I don't know if that changes from like playthrough to playthrough or like what you could do with that. So if you're listening to this and you're more of an Amiga an Amiga Joe and Mac fan and you have some answers to this, please respond on one of the social media outlets to let us know like what the deal is with that, because it didn't make any sense to me when I watched it.
Maybe it's like activation codes for warheads or something.
I'm hoping that it's like an Endless Runner starring Dolomite.
Oh man, yeah, maybe they were just massive Dolomite fans. In which case, the Amiga version is the only one to play. So. Okay, so that's Joe and Mac. We've walked you through stage to stage. We've talked about the mechanics of the game. We've talked about what works and what doesn't work. So everybody, let's do a little round robin here and kind of rate the game for me. Now that you've played through it, now that we've experienced the various ports, we've done the deep dive. What do you think of Joe and Mac now and this experience right here? Joseph, you want to go first?
Yeah, sure. Since I'm the one who roped you all into this madness, I will start first. And you know what? When I first started playing Joe and Mac again, I thought to myself, is this really the game that I loved so much growing up? And then as I kept playing, I thought, yeah, this is pretty much the same game. So I'm coming away from this still positive on Joe and Mac, on the side of Joe and the side of Mac. I'm going to give this 3 out of 5 Bafoom.
All right. Brian, how about you, buddy? What do you think of this?
Yeah, I had never played this earlier. This is my first foray into it. It was considerably janky at parts, but still, it might not have been as crisp of a gameplay experience, but it was charming, and it at least was not frustrating, like eternally frustrating, like the Genesis version was. So I'll still give it a positive 3 out of 5 inventions of the wheel.
Nice. How about you, Frank?
You know what? It's in my childhood, it's a big blur because all these cave type games from the SNES, I've played them all at some point, but there was we're not going into sequels, but there's Joe and Mac 2, Congo Escaper, all these other games, and I thought they were all the same game, in my memory. And I was like, I was kind of hoping I would turn into a monkey at some point. I didn't, and then but. Overall, it wasn't that bad, other than shitty platforming and stuff. But if you walk into it not hoping for a good platformer, if you're just hoping for a kind of pseudo run and gun, then it's okay. It's good. It's fun. It'll make you laugh because there's a bunch of little goofy things, and it's very sexist and it's very it's very dated in that kind of way. But I would definitely give it a 3. Melting faces off of big dinosaurs out of 5.
All right. Well, so for my experience, when I think back on this game, it's the art that really stands out. And as a kid, like that was, the images of the game in my head were just based on the way it looked and not so much how the game played. So when I started up the playthrough this time for the podcast, I didn't really I didn't go into it with any real expectations. I mean, you can probably, if you listen back to episode 1, our collective reactions to Joseph's reveal of what the game is going to be, we were all just kind of like, oh, okay, yeah, it's Joe and Mac, it'll be fine. And so we started playing the game, and I was just like, man, this game is like the mechanics of the movement and the platforming is just so soft and floaty and kind of boring. And the stages were quick, and because we were focusing so much on the Super Nintendo version for the sake of the podcast, you have to compare, though, the original version, the arcade version, and as I've already mentioned on the show, there was some division there. Like different consoles got different aspects of the game. And so I feel like the Super Nintendo sort of suffers for that. And if we could go back again, maybe I would try to just play the Super Nintendo version, not so much worry about the others. But I think we got some good talk out of it. So it's got its ups and downs. I don't think that the game is terribly fun to play. If we're being honest, I am charmed by the art. I am charmed by the comedy. The animations are fun. And that's a thing we didn't really even touch on too much. But in the Super Nintendo version, there's so many animations that are missing from Joe and Mac and from the other enemies. Yeah, I mean, like just down to like the simple fact of the variations of Joe and Mac's celebratory "I just beat the boss" gestures.
Okay.
Like even that's not even there in the Super Nintendo version. So there's a lot of things that the SNES version misses out on. And since we're focused specifically on rating the SNES version, I can't in good conscience give it too favorable of a rating. So I give it 2.5 Brontosaurus burgers out of 5. Because there's I mean, I had some fun with it. It's thankfully easy. It's thankfully short. But overall, it's not a great game. It doesn't hold up super well.
No.
So we've gone through our rating here. And if you listen to the podcast and you're thinking to yourself, well, where can I get my hands on this? Unfortunately, that remake never got made, and none of the various digital platforms have it available, at least that I could find at the time of recording this podcast. So, as with Little Nemo, your best bet is to secure it, on a collector's market. Right now, the average price for a loose cartridge for Joe and Mac for the Super Nintendo run you about $17.25. If you manage to find it complete in box, you're looking at an average of about $61.56. And if you get a brand new one, still sealed, I guess, in the box, it's almost $400.
Wow.
Yeah. So I mean, people
Crazy.
are quite.
If you get a brand new one, give me that.
Yeah.
I recommend, Sunday morning going to a flea market, getting some pierogies. And,
It's going to be Frank's recommendation every episode.
just grabbing the game,
Yeah. Yeah, if you can find it. I mean, $17, like based on my rating, yeah, I think that's fair. Like if you're a Super Nintendo collector, this is one worth having in your
I think
collection.
so.
$20, yeah.
Yeah,
Nothing
definitely.
wrong with that.
Does Patreon let you send in closed in box games?
No, but if
cash only?
anyone is ever listening to this and wants to contribute to the Doki Doki game collection, hit us up because we will surely give you a mail address.
We need a P.O. box. So before we wrap up here on Joe and Mac, we want to talk about the music because I do think that there are some notable things about it. It's not the best Super Nintendo soundtrack by a long shot, and there are definitely some songs that I could do without. But I just want to say before we talk about who composed it, man, the boss theme of this game to me is mwah.
Yeah.
It's so
Yeah,
good.
it's surely the best track in the game.
Yeah, and you hear it a lot because there's a lot of bosses, but it doesn't grow old. Like it's a very good one, and I keep humming it like the day after.
Yeah, I keep thinking about that opening, that da-na, da-na. It's such a good way of establishing a threat coming at you, and then the rest of it it's almost like a dance with the boss, like
like a dance rock song, like a 50s rock.
Yeah, and so the composers, we'll go through the different versions real quick. For Joe and Mac in the arcade, it was Seiichi Hamada, who is also known for Heavy Barrel on the NES and Windjammers on Neo Geo.
Oh, no way.
Yeah.
Wow.
For the SNES version, we have Seiji Momoi, who did music for Super Smash Bros. Brawl on Wii, and Congo's Caper, which we mentioned in passing on Super Nintendo. And then for the SNES version, we have. Is that right, Brandon? That we have two? Do we have two composers for SNES? Okay,
yeah,
cool.
yeah. It seemed like it was like a collaborative effort.
Well, that's another. By the way, another Seiji Yamanaka, who did music on Congo's Caper also, and Magical Drop 2 for the Super Nintendo.
And as an aside, I love me some Magical Drop.
Yes.
So if you like fun, like anime-inspired puzzle games, definitely check it out.
Yes, it's a great series. And then considered the best of the bunch by many, we have Matt Furness on the Genesis soundtrack, who has a list of credits that are way too long to go through right now.
Yeah, when I was researching Matt Furness, I mean, I had some familiarity with his name because of just his works, but yeah, the dude, he was quite prolific. So, and the Genesis version of the soundtrack is definitely, it's definitely distinct in the way that only a Genesis game can be. While we're on the subject of music here, I had some communication with Patrick, who is the host from Retro Game Audio, which is a friend of the show. He's one of the hosts. And we had some communication about this game. And Patrick, if you have any familiarity with Retro Game Audio, you know that these guys are... they're pros, like they know exactly what's going on with the development of all these soundtracks, and they know the hardware involved. And so they have a special knack of like being able to dig in and kind of uncover some mysteries. So it wasn't a ton of stuff that Patrick was able to uncover about Joe and Mac in particular for the Super Nintendo. But one fun little anecdote that he came across was the opening of the SNES version has a vocal sample in it. And vocal samples especially for the Nintendo, but also in the Super Nintendo, have an interesting history. And there's some fantastic conversation about that on Retro Game Audio. Particularly, check out the episode with Batsley Adams. As those guys do, the deepest of dives into the NES samples. Super good episode. But so Patrick, he dug into Joe and Mac, and he found that there was a weird little thing with the audio sample that plays at the beginning that says Daddy East. So when you boot the game up, it's a little bit silly, Patrick says. It uses 2 sound channels and doubles up that sample with one slightly behind the other to strengthen the echo effect on it. 2-channel echo is typically the way in NES games, but less common in the SNES because it already has built-in echo and reverb effects. But they went ahead and used the built-in echo effect plus the 2-channel echo, which kind of makes it hard to understand. So Patrick is actually kind enough to rip some samples from the SNES game and divide it up, the audio, into separate clips so we could hear exactly what he was talking about. So let's take a listen to the first one, which is the Data East vocal sample without the accompanying background music. Okay, so that's what it sounds like normally. In this second clip, you can hear the sample with just a single channel. And in the third clip, you can hear it with just the single vocal sample and with the added SNES built-in echo effect. And lastly, here it is all together again so you can hear what it sounds like. Okay, so that's interesting, but one thing that might be a little more easygoing as far as technical information involving the soundtrack is the fact that there is a stage in the game that blatantly rips off a track from Super Mario Bros. 3. And once again, Patrick was good enough to take audio from both the Joe and Mac stage and the Super Mario Brothers stage and piece them together so that you could hear back to back just how close it is. Okay, so we're ready to announce the next episode in the Doki Doki Game Club series, and Frank is actually on the chopping block here. Frank, what did you choose for us to play?
I chose a game called Days Before Christmas. It is a game that none of us has played, as far as I know.
Right, definitely not.
And as far as I was concerned, I never even heard of it until today when I was researching what kind of holiday game that we could play before Christmas. Apparently, we'll talk about it more, but it is a kind of platforming type game that we're going to play on the SNES. There is a Genesis version, but we're not going to play that one. We're going to play the SNES version where you play as Santa Claus. So
you might want to specify that's DAZE.
Yeah,
that's right.
Yeah, Days Before
it's got to be a
Christmas,
play on words.
DAZE. Definitely, and the album, the album cover, the game cover is Santa Claus coming out of a present with bells and stars around his eyes. So.
It's very pleasant. Yeah, it's like there's nothing threatening about that whatsoever.
No, so that's you'll have 2 weeks to play that, and it'll be fun.
Yeah, we should be ready to launch that episode several days before Christmas. December 11th, in fact, should be the date of that episode. So please be sure to check back in. And now it's time for
Doki Doki Powerline.
That's right, it's Doki Doki Powerline, where we plug you into the source of the hottest gamer tips and tricks. The winner of this episode's Powerline Pro Tip comes from Chris DeRosa, a.k.a. Spookmeister C, who has provided us with a collection of elite strategies that are sure to turn you into a conquering caveman in no time. Joseph, would you care to read off some of Spook's?
Sure, and I'm going to do this in my best game players VHS tips voice, just to get the dry
nice.
technique across. So let's start with weapon selection. Try to use the wheel as much as possible. One of the strongest and versatile weapons besides the fire. Maneuvers.
Nice.
Make use of the roll, double tap in any direction, and high jump, hold up and jump as much as possible. Movement and speed is important for some parts/items. And now we have an infinite lives tip, which I'm sure will come in handy for a lot of people. If you have an issue with lives, you can always replay older stages, I think, by hitting start and select. And he's right. I'm not sure about the buttons, but he's right about playing older stages. You just collect extra lives and hit start select to go back to the map and keep repeating until you have enough lives. This isn't something I realized until a few playthroughs. So yeah, those are the tips this week. And you know what? I think they're pretty damn good, and that's why we chose them.
Absolutely. Once again, thanks to Chris DeRosa for his tips. And also, special thanks to Austin Green, a.k.a. Katamari Jr., for giving us the gift of music. He made up the jingle for Doki Doki Powerline, so thank you for that. Okay, so before we wrap things up, I want to take a moment to give a shout-out to a couple of friends of the show, the aforementioned Retro Game Audio and the Grindcore Podcast. If you're enjoying our show so far, I'd say there's a good chance you'll dig what these guys are doing. Retro Game Audio is basically the authority on classic video game music. Patrick and Steve, who host the show, have an encyclopedic knowledge about sound hardware and video game history. The Grindcore Podcast is more focused on the current VGM music scene and pop culture in general. In addition to thoughtful conversation, Johnny Grind and Frost conduct a lot of interviews with musicians operating in the VGM scene. So if either of those descriptions sounds appealing, be sure to check out our show notes for links to both podcasts. And with that, we conclude episode 2 of Doki Doki Game Club. I want to thank my caveman co-hosts for participating in this prehistoric podcast. Who are you guys, and where can people find you online if they want to get in touch?
Hi, I'm Brian Grogan. You can find me on Twitter at Ken O. Shinobi. I'm also a regular contributor to shitpost.nsf on Facebook.
I'm Frank Martin, and you can find me on Twitter at Hios_IO and on Twitch at twitch.tv/Hios_. I usually play the games that will be featured here on this podcast. So look around after this podcast comes out, and probably the Wednesday or Friday after the Monday that this comes out, I shall be playing Days Before Christmas.
And I am Joseph Lester, and you can find me on Twitter at Moldylox, MOLDILOX. You can check my website out, which has comics and other kind of cool stuff up at subhumanzoids.com. And I also write for Crunchyroll and Otaku USA magazine, so check those out for more stuff. I write about video games and anime and all that good nerd stuff.
And I think I also want to take a moment to point out that if you like the sound of Joseph's voice, Joseph has another podcast that's actually getting ready to drop soon. Isn't that
Yes,
right?
it should be dropping. I mean, it should be out by the time this episode comes out. It's going to be called The Subhuman Cast, and it is basically just a podcast for my blog. And I talk with my friend Kanan Schledelzink about video games and whatever the hell else we feel like talking about. The first episode is our official ranking of every Mario game ever made.
Nice.
Whoa. That's a heavy burden. Oh, and what about you, Brennan?
And you can find me personally on Twitter as Genocide, and that's spelled DJINNOCIDE. You can follow the show on DokiDokiGameClub.com, on Twitter at Doki Doki GC, and on Facebook and YouTube. And boy, we've really got a lot of stuff covered. So if there's anything that you're looking for us on, there's a good chance we're on it. So the best way to find that is actually to go to the website, and you'll see buttons and links for all sorts of things. So check us out there.
Yeah, and if you want us on somewhere else, let us know. Like if you want to MySpace us, just let us know. We'll
That's right. One. Yeah. If there's anything that you can't find us on, make us aware, and we will absolutely get it sorted out. If you enjoy the show and you would like to support us, word of mouth is huge on that. So tell your friends, retweet, reshare on Facebook. Let your friends and family know about the show. It is massive for us. Rating the show and writing reviews on iTunes, Google Play Music, or Stitcher is also mega, mega huge. And last but not least, we have a Patreon with some pretty exciting rewards available. So if you have a couple of bucks and you can spare some of that and would like to contribute to the show in that manner, head on over to patreon.com/Doki Doki Game Club and check it out. We actually received a rather generous pledge of support from Patreon user Super Battle Genius, a.k.a. Joe Shea, who bought into the Doki Exploki tier. So he's got some nice goodies on the way, and he will actually be joining us as a special guest backer co-host on an upcoming episode. So stay tuned for that. And if that kind of thing sounds like something you might be interested in, head on over to Patreon for more details. We've only got 4 slots open total, and there are 3 left after Joe, so make sure you get on that as quick as you can. So on behalf of Brian, Frank, Joseph, and myself, thanks for listening, and until next time,
Adios, Battletoads.